Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we're going to talk about some animation principles. Now, you don't have to be an animator to use these principles in your still drawings, but they will help breathe life into your drawings. So let's start out with squash and stretch. So the best way for me to explain squash and stretch to you is to actually just show you, right? So basically, the body folds and bends in certain areas when we get into certain positions, right? Now, in this example, we have a guy lifting weights, right? Now, what I want to show you is the way his arm, which we're just going to focus on his arm in this example, right? I just want to show you how it squashes and how it stretches. So as he's lifting up the dumbbell here, there's certain things happening to his arm, right? On this outer area here, this area of his hand is stretching, right? So you have a stretch here and a stretch here. And this area here, you can see that the arm is squashing inside there and even under the arm here. So this is a squash and this is a stretch. So if you actually do this, if you actually take up a dumbbell and you lift it up in this position, you would actually feel the muscles in your hand stretching in this area. You could actually feel it, and then in the opposite part, you'll feel that squashing. Now, squashing and stretching usually work in tandem with each other. So let's say, like for this example, we have the arm. The stretch is happening opposite, or you could say parallel. But I would prefer to go with opposite, on the opposite side of the arm, right? So this usually reoccurs in different areas of the body. So let me show you guys another example. Okay, here's another example of a woman doing like a yoga pose. Now I want to show you again how the squash and stretch happens, right? So she's stretching over here. I kind of made this on the notes with this example. She's stretching here, right? This whole area of her body is stretching that way, right? It's pulling this way, right? And she is actually coming down. The stretch is actually pulling down this way, right? It's going whoop down this way. Now you can see on the opposite side here, her tummy area is squashing down. So if we were to just simplify this whole thing and just focus on the torso, this is basically how it would look. You have the stretch going this way and then the squashing up inside here, right? And remember, you don't it's all about keeping it simple, and very you're communicating very simply what the person is doing. Don't get too worried about anatomy and thinking about where the ribs would go, and the abs and this and that. Just watch how the body stretches, where it squashes. There's actually a squash happening here also because the way she's folding her leg here, it's stretching. As again I said, if you actually do this pose and you actually bend your foot in that pose, if any of you do yoga or go to the gym and you actually bend that pose, you actually feel the muscles stretching. And usually at the opposite end again, you have the squash. And there are different levels of stretching and squashing, right? So if you actually look here, you could see that there's a slight squash happening here, right? It's not as intense as this one over here, but it's still a slight squash. So these are more intense squashes, and this is a very less intense squash, right? But you still have to pay attention to how intense you would draw it. And if you're having trouble with drawing the squash, you could always revert back to the surface lines, right? Because they would give you an idea of where and how to draw the squash, right? Because they will show you how the body is folding, right? So it's squashing in here. Again, we have another squash here. stretch, body stretching here, and it's a slight squash. It's not as intense as the others, but it's still a squash. So let's move on to another example. I'm actually going to show you how I actually draw and think about it while I'm doing the gesture. So we have another example of a woman stretching here. A nice stretch, a nice squash. Again, I always start off with the head as in the previous example. And she has a really clear line of action. So if you want to put that down before you actually do the gesture, you could see that clear line of action, nice swooping action, right? So we're gonna follow that line of action. We paying attention to the principles we did in the last class, right? We're not just gonna listen to them and then throw them away, right? When we're moving on, we have to keep them in mind when we're doing our gestures. So we have the overlap and the rules of perspective. When we're doing this, the line of action, clear silhouette, everything comes into play, right? So she's stretching here. Sometimes I like to draw the torso in first, right? And have that immediate stretching and squashing on the opposite side. So her leg goes way back here. Right? Next leg comes up here. There's overlap, so we could see which leg is in front of the other. Right? Again, there's a stretching motion here, and then the leg squashes in there. Right? And then her arm comes down here. So we're getting a nice clear silhouette with this pose. Right? And she's stretching all the way. Very graceful pose. Right? I'm gonna put in too much detail there. And so now I'm gonna just draw in her head, and I want to keep the silhouette clear, so I'm gonna put a chin here. Let me clean that up for you guys to see. Alright, I want to keep the silhouette clear, so I pull the chin away from where I previously drew it. And then her hair is coming down this way. Alright, just put in a quick suggestion of the face. Alright, paying attention to the squash and the stretch. Alright, I need to make an adjustment to this leg so it will be on the same plane. Oh, now that I'm looking under her dress, I think, no, it's actually the right leg, my bad. Yep, that's the right leg. I thought the left leg was actually her right leg for a second. Right? So there we have it. And if we look, we'll see, let me change the brush so you can see the color. We have this nice swoop and stretch going along with the line of action, stretching out here. And on the opposite end of that intense stretch is a squash here, because the body needs to bend, right? The opposing action on each side of the body. So we have the stretch on one side, and then we'll have the squash on the next side. We normally won't have, like with this kind of bending and this kind of intense stretching, you most likely will have a squash on the opposite side, right, to balance things off, right? So have the swoop and stretch here. Same thing with this leg here. You have a stretch going this way, the muscles pulling that way, and then it's squashing in here, right? Just like coming in here. Now there's a slight squash here, but nothing too intense to make the flesh actually bendy in like the others. But it's still slightly there. Alright? So basically what I want you guys to do is to observe the model and to see where the body is actually squashing and where it's stretching. So when you're drawing, you could actually feel it, and you'll have poses where you really need to look at it for a longer period of time, or sometimes actually feel the pose, actually do the pose that the model is doing. So you actually feel where the body is stretching and where it's squashing, because sometimes in the references you look at, you might have some trouble trying to figure out, okay, which part of the body is stretching, which part is squashing, especially like if the drawing has a lot of perspective and a lot of depth in it, you might find it hard. So I want you guys to like practice like observing where the squashes and the stretches are, because it really adds that three-dimensionality to the body. Because remember, the body is like this squishy thing. It's made out of flesh and blood and stuff. So when it stretches, it's gonna squash, right? So let's move on to the next topic, which is straight against curves. Okay guys, so basically straights against curves is something that you could apply, or it actually happens in the human body when it bends and twists and stretches, right? So what I'm gonna show you what happens to the body when and how straights and curves come about, right? So in this example, we have a girl doing a yoga pose again, and what I want you to do is I want you to observe this area here where the leg is stretching out. On the opposite side, we have these kind of squashing curves here. So this is the straight and the curve. So this happens in different areas of the body, and usually the straights happen when the bone, on the area with the bone closest to the bone, and the curve, well, the curves happen on the side with the flesh. All right. So here we have like it's kind of like when you have the squash and the stretch, right? The area that stretches is it will usually have a straighter line than the areas that have the curves, obviously, right? So same thing here with the torso. Now, even though this torso seems to have a curve, it's not as curved as the area here, which is squashing, right? So you can see that they are kind of opposite of each other, and like the squash and the stretch is the same thing with the straight and the curve. They happen kind of in tandem with each other and right opposite each other. So it's the same thing with this leg. Now, I doubt many of you could probably do this pose, but if you do this pose, you'll feel the stretch in here, right? And it'll be straight, a much more straighter line, right? And then on the opposite side, you'd have the curves. Now, basically, why you would want to apply this is to have that sense of contrast. So the contrast will make it less monotonous, right? You don't want to have parallel lines. Let's say if we were drawing the leg, you don't want to have drawing the leg like this. You don't want to have like these parallel lines. It feels less natural. And like that's the foot. You don't want to have those kind of parallel lines. Same thing here with the torso. Try to avoid this. Try to have your squashes and your stretches and your straights against your curves, right? I'm going to show you guys the next example here. Let me deselect that. So we have a girl doing another yoga pose. Yoga poses are like the best to explain this. So again, same thing area here. She's stretching out we have the straight, and then we have the curves. Now, if you're not sure when you're drawing, because if we look at here, we're seeing some, like a flesh is hanging down here, and then we're seeing some flesh hanging down here, right? So it may seem like, oh, like it's not straight. There are curves, right? So what are you talking about, right? So again, as I said, we want to avoid these kind of monotonous shapes, right? We want to have some contrast. This looks very unappealing. So what we want to do is have the straight and the curves. And the thing about the straight is that it shows emphasis of the stretch, right? Rather than just having you showing the flesh on how it bends and stuff. And again, with gesture drawing, we want to encourage the story and pushing the pose rather than anatomy, right? So the straight against the curves is a nice contrast, and it also helps with pushing the pose, right? Same thing on this side, straight, curve. And then we have straight here because it's a stretch, and then the opposite side, the curve, right? And you're gonna have like a bunch of contrasts of straight against curves in different areas. So this straight is not gonna be straight right down, right? It's gonna have curves here, and then the opposite end would have a straight, because the leg, if you do the pose again, here would be stretching more, right? And then the flesh curves here. Alright, so find out where it feels like there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of stretching, and that will be the straighter edge, and then you could come and have a contrast with the curvature of the flesh. Right? So straight against curves, right? Now I've seen a lot of people apply this rule, right? And they tend to apply it, but what they do is they tend to treat it as something really, really flat, right? And they don't see it as something, they forget that the human body is a fleshy thing, and they tend to draw it really flat and really straight edge, and you get like this really, really flat feeling. Yes, there's contrast on each side, but you want to have like a flow. You want to have a nice flow, right? You don't want it to be too like straight, you know? You want to have a nice flow of curves on the opposite side, straight, right? Remember, avoid these repetitive shapes, no parallels, right? Straight against curves, nice flowing shapes. All right, so that straight against curves is pretty simple. I'm gonna leave an assignment for you guys for you to practice straight against curves and stretching and squashing. And remember that you have to keep practicing and keep doing it over and over and over, because repetition is the key to success and the key to improving, right? So let's move on to the assignment now.